Boom, trying out the new bumper. I think it worked.
Nice logo.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. When I found out about Endeavor, I was like, what? Why hadn't I been informed? And then when I met Linda, it was like lights turned on. We are here to talk strategy with someone who has quietly and persistently changed the world in 45 countries. Hi, Linda. How are you?
Hi, Seth. It's so good to be here, and congrats on tomorrow.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Mostly, though, we are here to answer people's questions and talk about Endeavor. So, first thing to start with, in 3 sentences, what exactly have you been doing for decades?
Chica loca, crazy girl. We have been building entrepreneurial ecosystems and venture capital ecosystems in emerging and frontier markets around the world, and doing so in a hybrid way. So we have the nonprofit that does the support work, and we have co-investment funds that give LPs returns while also fueling the nonprofit to be self-sustaining. That's what we've been up to.
Okay, so the thesis, as I understand it, is change is often catalyzed by organizations and corporations, and many of those are startups. They are entrepreneurs, people who see something, who care about something, who build something. And the thing is, if we look, some countries are better at spawning these kinds of generative entrepreneurs than others. It's an ecosystem thing. And my book is a lot about systems, so that's what made me think we should talk about this. But before we go any further, I need you to share some numbers. Tell me how many entrepreneurs and what the revenue generated so far is by those entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, we've screened over 50,000. We work with today around 2,500 entrepreneurs. They've generated over 60 billion annually, over 4 million jobs. And then Endeavor Catalyst, our funds manage 540 million assets under management. And what's interesting is of the 325 investments we've made, over 50 have, as my colleague Alan Taylor would say, grown up to be unicorns. So the billion-dollar tech companies, often the first in their country. So in 15 countries, Endeavor entrepreneurs are the first ever to show that it's possible to scale a company that large. And just the last fun fact is that Endeavor Catalyst is the #1 investor in unicorns, these billion-dollar companies in the world, outside of the US, China, and India. So if you take the rest of the world, Endeavor Catalyst has invested in more unicorns than Sequoia, Excel, Tiger, SoftBank, et cetera. So that's a fun fact.
It's more than a fun fact that we often hear about organizations that mean well that are struggling. And part of the challenge they have is they're trying to fight a system as opposed to build with a system. So just to share this again, what year did you start?
1997.
So if you had said in 1997, I'm going to help create 4 million well-paying jobs and generate how many $1 billion in revenue?
67 last year, billion.
Yeah. People would say that's impossible. Well, yeah, it's impossible to do it in one day.
They did, in fact. They said I was crazy. I was chica loca. I was the crazy girl for suggesting that entrepreneurs in these markets would succeed.
Yes, exactly. And you weren't crazy because what you understood is that the key element of 2 key elements that are relevant here of change, of strategy, are systems and time. And so you didn't build these companies. You created a system for these companies to get built.
Yeah, and I would add third, which is the motivation or the mindset. Because the other thing is, the other thing we were considered crazy for is that we said these entrepreneurs will not only be able to scale innovations, right? And in a tech-enabled or tech-centric way, when no one thought this was possible outside Silicon Valley and maybe one or two other places, but we said they would pay it forward. And it turns out we now have research that giving them that pay it forward, what we call the multiplier mindset, right? And we're now measure people's multiplier maps and the multiplier effect of several entrepreneurs paying it forward. And by reinvesting, by investing, mentoring, inspiring, and training that next generation, that actually is what leads to that system order change.
Yep. Right. No, so Ashley's got it right. And what you brought here is
Thank you,
empathy.
Ashley.
Empathy of helping people get to what they wanted and helping them change what they wanted by teaching them that the ecosystem is going to keep fueling the forward momentum that all Silicon Valley has. At the beginning,
Yeah.
it had the chip companies. We don't need those anymore. What it has is you're surrounded by other people who get the joke.
And this is really important. So one of our earliest countries that we operated in was Latin America. And here you had very few people trying to show that innovation can happen when you don't have the right last name and the family connections. And they were frenemies. They could have said, all right, well, we're all in this dog eat dog world, kill or be killed. And instead they said, you know what, we're building the ecosystem together. So just last week, it turns out that on our board, Endeavor entrepreneurs, first of all, Marcos Galperin created what was originally considered the eBay of Latin America, Mercado Libre. Then it was,
I remember.
Then it was Alibaba or Amazon. Today, we found him when he was literally just starting out with this idea. He'd left Stanford Business School and come back with his co-founder, Nankaza, to Argentina. Today, it's the highest valued market cap company on the continent of Latin America. Mercado Libre is $100 billion market cap company. And he and the founders of Globant and now Alec Oxenford, who founded Deramate, who is a chief rival of Mercado Libre, and others are all on the Endeavor Argentina board trying to further the ecosystem. So this idea that your frenemies can actually help in a coexistence way educate an entire ecosystem is a very important mindset to have, or else everyone's just in it for themselves.
Yeah. So history lesson, Henry Ford wrote a 4-page article in Encyclopedia Britannica explaining exactly how mass production worked in his factory. If he had kept it a secret, you would argue that he would have had a competitive advantage. But in fact, by teaching people how to do it, he created a system so that the parts he wanted to buy became cheaper and other companies had enough money to buy things from him, and the cycle moves forward.
Yeah. The negative example I use is Route 128. I grew up near Route 128 in Boston, and I always say to people, do you want to be Silicon Valley or Route 128? And almost always the answer is, what's Route 128? And it's like, yes. Back in the 1980s, the Boston corridor of Route 128, which is a highway where, as I said, I grew up 5 minutes away, dominated in chips. They were better at the early tech than Silicon Valley. What happened? They made everyone sign non-disclosure agreements. They made everyone sign non-competes. They forbid networking. Who forbids networking? But they did because they wanted to create these vertically integrated companies. And guess what? It failed. Silicon Valley, no NDAs, no non-competes. You're leaving the company. You're given not only encouragement, you're often invested in. And that's kind of what has really built Silicon Valley as we know it today.
Yeah, I was on Route 128. My first job
in
1983 was in Kendall Square, which is the center of the whole loop. And there was the big difference, because then I had just come from Stanford. Stanford had a hamburger joint. Stanford had all these places where people hung out. There was no place to hang out and bump into the other people because that wasn't happening.
And it turns out that was intentional. It was terrible. That was strategic not to let people hang out with someone from another company. How crazy is that?
Right. So
luckily today, Kendall Square, Harvard Square, a little better.
All right. So we have a question here from Nigeria, but I think you have the answer.
Oh my goodness. I love Endeavor Nigeria. I was just in Lagos last month, and I just did a webinar like this 2 days ago with the Flutterwave, the entire Flutterwave 800-person team. GB is an Endeavor entrepreneur. So we have about 25 Endeavor entrepreneurs from Nigeria, and they are reimagining, redefining fintech as we know it, health tech as we know it. In fact, we have one of our selection panels every month. And in our last ISP, as we call them, the International Selection Panel, was in Dublin. It was our 100th in-person selection panel. We have them virtual too. The chairman of Endeavor Ireland is the edge of U2. So it was very cool. And one of the selected companies.
You're jumping over some pretty cool highlights. Say that last sentence again, because I don't think most people.
The chairman of Endeavor Ireland is Edge. I call him Edge, or the Edge of U2. He's amazing, very active. So he hosted us. And one of the selected companies, it's led by a Nigerian, this amazing founder, Ridwan, and the company Lemfi is one of the top remittance companies in the world. In fact, one of the only other competitors in the world is dLocal, one of our Endeavor entrepreneurs from Uruguay, one company. So I'm a huge fan of Nigerian founders. I think the venture capital scene has been lacking there and lagging, and we're helping to work on that. But the talent's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about a place like Nigeria and systems, the thing that created the dominant financial system in Nigeria was oil, right? And you show up and others like you show up and say, we're going to build an ecosystem next to that one. We have enough power to kick that one out, but we have enough power to show people who are paying attention there's a path forward.
Well, not only that, yes. And what's super interesting is the central bank has been really challenging for Nigerian entrepreneurs. And any fintech entrepreneur, I joke every week, they're going to Abuja to meet with the central government, but bankers. But here's what happened. They went from just being regulated and having to sit and go show the regulators to trying to educate the regulators. Hey, we want to compete with Brazil in fintech. We want to compete with China and Silicon Valley. This is not efficient. Why don't we create system? Why don't you allow us to do a credit card, reader, right? A la Square, or Block. And that's what's happening. So it's super interesting. Now you have this young tech community helping to educate the government on how do we play at a global world-class level. I'm so excited about the future in these countries.
So you're in 45 countries now.
We are.
And I don't think
we launched Ukraine last month.
Ukraine. I don't think you have a Vatican City branch, but what in the zone between we ought to be in Venezuela and we are in Venezuela, what are the steps? What's hard? What's scarce in finding your footing in a new place?
It's a great question. We have a model where we say we have to be pulled in, not push. And in fact, where Endeavor failed was trying to go to India, where people were like, yeah, this is nice to have, it's not need to have. And we never got really the traction. So we build local boards. We have 600 full-time Endeavor staff around the world and we have local boards. So we combine sort of the best of a global network with local boards. Ultimately, our Endeavor entrepreneurs take over these boards. And so we have to be sort of pulled in. There has to be enough demand, enough of potential to have, the future unicorns and soonicorns and the future venture capital, and yet not so done already that it's like China, we don't need you. So it's sort of that balance.
So the time I spent with the folks in Turkey was extraordinary, and you weren't there. You couldn't be there because you're in 45 countries. Linda can only be in one country at a time. And so to sit in the Endeavor office and feel the energy that people were bringing to the table, it's very easy for people to say, this is, Linda's a maker of magic, which is true. But what's more true is that A, you built the system, and B, you told everyone else how to do it. Right.
Yeah.
So
and everyone else has their story. And what I love, is that people, I think, initially said, oh, we have to tell your story about starting Endeavor in the taxi cab. I said, no, don't tell my story. Tell your story.
Right.
Meet the entrepreneurs. Because then it's authentic, right? It's not you're reading a script. This is your authentic. And I'm very proud, yes, that the Endeavor team, anywhere in the world, we have team members going to FII, going to Saudi Arabia. It's the same thing. Actually, Latifa Awalan, our managing director, and in Endeavor Saudi, was an Endeavor entrepreneur herself, right? And back to Turkey, one of the things I'm proudest of is Turkey is they're leading the way in terms of female founders who are crushing it. So Honda of Insider is probably the top female SaaS, she's the top SaaS marketing entrepreneur really in the world. And she happens to be a woman, but also just in terms of female CEO role models is incredible. And then Rena of Spike Games, who's part of the Peak Games Mafias. We talk about the equivalent of the PayPal Mafias locally. And so she worked for Peak Games, an Endeavor company that was bought by Zynga, bought for, over $1 billion. And now she's founded Spike Games. And so it's really, really exciting. I love Endeavor Turkey.
Yeah. And, Michael has a skeptical question that I would like to respond to. But the thing is, the world is safer than it has been in my entire lifetime. And the amount of bribes that you need in most countries around the world has gone down. And the murder rate in just about every city around the world has gone down dramatically. That healthcare that's offered to us is so much better. Like people in my grandparents' age had extra kids because they knew they were going to die, right? And so, yes, we have to deal with the fragility of the fabric of the world that we are trying to weave together. But the best way to do it is to weave the world together, not to say we're running away.
Yeah, I mean, we are not yet in Venezuela, so there are some places that are, hard. But
relatively more difficult than others.
Yeah,
Yes.
but what I would say is that what's interesting is also marrying the best of the local systems, factory systems, with a global infrastructure. Basically, people won't take bribes when they know they can compete at a global level. They'll be invested in globally if they're a clean company. So it actually flips the script on locals who used to say, sorry, young person, you don't have the government contracts. You don't have the last family name. We're going to crush you. And it gives you the sense to say, no, we're not going to play on your terms. We're not going to take your bribes. And we're going to get venture from outsiders who will come in and help us grow and crush you. And that's what's so incredible is that people told Mercado Libre, back to Mercado Libre, they were going to be, decimated. Today it's $100 billion market cap company. So you have these, look at Nubank, which is disrupting all the banks in Latin America. And we could go on and on. I think that's what's exciting.
Love it. All right. As we wrap this up, here's a question from Catherine. Do you see it?
Yes, I do. Look, I think that one of the biggest challenges for me personally, so we had setbacks, like I said, we tried to go into India and they said, there wasn't that much enthusiasm, but that didn't derail me. I'd say the toughest thing I had to as a leader deal with was, I describe Endeavor as a hybrid organization. And we have the nonprofit and then we have the funds. And the entrepreneurs really wanted this. They wanted us to co-invest. They wanted us to be on their side, even on their cap table. But a lot of the early supporters who were looking at the nonprofit and mentors were very skeptical and gave me a really hard time. And I think, so that was very difficult. And what I did was we said we're entrepreneur first. So I think one of the mistakes that leaders make is you're trying to please all people at all times. I think you talk about this, Seth, being very clear. Who is your end constituency? And we said it's entrepreneurs first. And that allowed us to take what they wanted and to articulate it in a way that made it mission consistent and yet moved us forward. And some people left, and others who joined did so with a clarity and a purpose that was helpful. But it was a transition period that was tough.
Okay, so let's highlight this. When you pick your customers, when you pick your competitors, when you pick your investors, you are picking your future. And
totally.
If you don't do the picking, then someone's doing it to you or for you or at you. Mm-hmm. And part of what it is to lead. And remember, when Endeavor started, how many people were on the team the first 2 weeks?
2, 3.
2, right? So when we begin any of these projects, we're not at scale. We decide to become at scale. That's a decision. Pick your scale, pick your future. And what you have done so elegantly over 28 years, 28, am I doing the math right? Something Almost. Like that, is make these choices. This is what we do. This isn't what we do. Right?
And just to highlight that, I'm on the board or advise so many entrepreneurs with startups who are no longer aligned with their early investors, right? And what do they do? And so a lot of times we're figuring out, how do you buy out the early investors, because maybe they were right. And this is true of teams too. Maybe they're right for a period, but as you're going to go pre-IPO, you're getting to your next, or you're going to a different country, they may not be aligned anymore. And I think sometimes trying to keep the band together that's not right for this next phase becomes really detrimental. It's hard, but you've got to make the changes, or the companies is never aligned in an easy way. What I always say is there's so much friction externally. If you create friction internally, you're dead. And the last thing I'll say is we ask entrepreneurs this. I interview every entrepreneur that's coming through Endeavor, and I ask this question: if your company dies in 10 years, is it suicide or homicide?
Ooh. Ooh.
You do not want to die by suicide, meaning self-inflicted wounds, right? If you can control, but you can't always control the competition. But if you die by suicide, it means you didn't make the right strategic choices, or you didn't get people along with the new strategy.
So what?
It's a good one, right? It's a good question.
People aren't going to forget that one for a long time. So the last line on my back cover is, "You're not sitting in traffic, you are traffic." And what that means is we are all part of a system. And sometimes someone shows up and devotes their life to creating changes in that system. And the outcome can be extraordinary because leverage is real. And the thing that made me the president of the Linda Rottenberg fan club from the first day was, you understand that. You understand the system is here, whether we like it or not, but we can do something with it. And we can not only put our name on it, but assemble 600 people, assemble 2,000 people, talk to 25,000 people, and the ripples continue. So thank you, Linda. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Seth. And this book is going to be really helpful. It really is. You need strategies. So thank you for writing this.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Everyone, go make a ruckus. We'll see you.